Welcome to the Winning Wellness Podcast, where we explore health, wellness, performance, and try to improve not only your quantity of life, but your quality of life. I'm your host, Mitch Schwartzman.
Patrick Dolan is joining us. I have known him for, 11 years or so. We actually did some graduate assistant work together at Lindenwood University. And since his time there, he has gone on to not only go all around the country, but actually around the world quite a bit. So he has some awesome experiences. He's gained some very interesting expertise, and he's going to share those things with us today. Coach Dolan, if you don't mind, when we get into some of the nitty-gritty, talk to us a little bit. I hope you're talking to us as coaches, but also athletes as well, so we can all kind of like grow from what you've got to share. But if you want to share your awesome background a little bit more, lay it on us. Where have you been? What have you been doing? And what are you doing now?
Yeah, sounds good. Pleasure to be on with you, Coach. But yeah, I'll just kind of jump back. I suppose I've known you for a little over a decade. That would have been just a few short years into the coaching career. But I guess just like quick personal background before jumping through the professional timeline. I'm from Philly, youngest of four boys, so kind of grew up in a very competitive, athletic household. Soccer was my main sport growing up. Played until my early 20s, played a lot of hockey and a little bit of baseball and basketball growing up, but soccer was kind of the main sport. And then in high school, actually started rowing. It was the winter after my freshman fall season and just kind of looked for something to stay in shape, and always personality wise, just looking for a little bit of a new adventure, and joined the rowing team. And the reason I think I bring that up is because I was a coxswain. Didn't know that necessarily going into trying to join the team, but coaches kind of quickly, I guess, saw some leadership attributes, as well as willingness to kind of work hard and push guys around me. So ended up being a coxswain, and I actually saw the head coach of my former high school program, unfortunately, a few weeks ago at a funeral. But I was kind of reflecting on it then, and I think that was actually probably like my earliest coaching days. Being in the boat, you need to know how to follow the rest of the team. There's times when you need to know when and how to lead. And yeah, certainly during race day, you need to be able to kind of adapt on the fly. But all that to say, yeah, it definitely influenced me, and knew I wanted to stay kind of in sport. I did not want to go work a typical 9 to 5. Really only knew physical therapy as a profession within exercise science, at least as a full-time credible profession. So kind of chose my undergrad thinking that I would eventually go for a physical therapy degree and licensure after that. But yeah, for summer after my freshman year of undergrad, studying sport and exercise phys at DeSales University, local school about an hour north of Philly, near Lehigh University. Got a great internship at a local private training facility where we worked with youth who were homeschooled and needed to come in for their kind of physical education credits, to high school athletes trying to gain scholarships to Division I or any kind of NCAA programs, to professional athletes who were in the off season, as well as, middle-aged men and women, some returning from stroke, just learning how to get up and down out of a chair, or learning how to pick things, pick a cup up off the table. So really, wide variety of clientele. Enjoyed all of it, really fell in love with the sports side, and just kind of ran with it from there. Couple internships, I suppose, through my undergraduate at Lehigh University, Temple, Xavier. So 4 internships by the time I was graduating my undergrad, and then a quick stint in professional baseball so that was with the Detroit Tigers down in Lakeland at their spring training facility, assisting their kind of rehab coordinator, as well as heading up the S&C for one of their minor league affiliates. And then that's when I jumped out to St. Louis and met you, Coach, at Lindenwood. So yeah, I feel like I'm ranting on the timeline, but that got me out to Lindenwood. Was an awesome, probably the most formative or transformative 2 years of my coaching career to date, which is about 15 years in. We could probably have an entire day's conversation or a week's conversation around the experience and incredible coaching staff and athletes, just the whole Lindenwood experience. Bounced around a couple different university programs from there, Santa Clara University, directorate, Manhattan College, which is a Division I program in the Bronx, to marrying my passion for soccer or football and S&C, and joining the New York Red Bulls. Was there for about a year and a half, and then eventually made the jump abroad and just actually moved back from Europe just before Christmas, so December of 23. I was out in Ireland for about 4 years, and during that stint, I'd also been serving as an independent contractor for U.S. Soccer out of the high performance department as well, and various kind of governing bodies, contract roles and stuff throughout kind of my work over the last 5-6 years. So I'll stop there and feel free to punch back and have me go deeper on any of that.
So you've kind of been taking it easy and just coasting. is what I think we're hearing. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think you did a good job of putting what I know or remember about your timeline in the microwave there. There's a lot to unpack, and it seems like every time I catch up with you, you're on to another twist and turn of this coaching career you've got. Two things I want to bring up. One, with rowing, total side note, but I just listened to the audiobook of Boys in the Boat, which is about an U.S. Olympic rowing team. And it's a good read. I understand they made a movie. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I had you in mind a lot of times. They were talking about it, and so great listen. I won't call it a read because I listened to the audiobook, but and then second of all, 4 internships in undergrad. Is that I catch that right?
Yeah,
that's good. So that's not unheard of, but that's pretty impressive. I remember thinking, because I had some pretty good experience by the time I became a grad assistant. And I remember thinking that my resume was pretty kick butt, and that maybe I shouldn't go do the grad assistant position, namely because I had already done a different graduate assistant position and already had a grad degree, but I didn't have a job. So I wanted to coach. And so I went back there, and I kind of thought, like, gosh, I've got X, Y, and Z internships, some years of personal training. And then I met you and kind of heard about your background. And I thought it wasn't like competitive, but it was almost like reassuring, like, oh, this is going to be a good place where I'm going to be around people they're doing the same things I am. They're committed, and they're going for it. So I kind of remember, like, even as a grad assistant, you had a pretty, like, interesting background already. So yeah, we had a special thing going over at Linwood. So interesting little hotbed.
for sure.
So with all the coaching, I remember talking to you when you were in the States and you were coaching, and you had, I would call it like a comfortable situation. You had coaching roles, you had coaching opportunities, and there would have been nothing wrong for a lot of us to stay the course and keep coaching where you were, whether it was at this place or that place.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to you, and you said, well, I'm shopping around for some PhD programs. And I thought, like, coach, you just spent the last 9 years or so working on this coaching industry. And I kind of asked you, I remember the conversation pretty well. I'll let you kind of maybe give an updated answer. I kind of said, like, well, okay, so you're going to go to get a PhD. Does that mean you want to teach? And you said, at the time, you said, no, I want to coach. Why did you feel it was necessary to step away from a full-time coaching position to pursue a PhD, and where do you think that that's going to take you in the future?
Yeah, great question. There's a whole list of both personal and professional reasons. So I won't be able to go through all of them. Some are obviously bigger, and I'll maybe try and hit those. I think maybe I'll try and do the professional ones first and then tie it off with the personal one. So professionally, just started to get very intrigued at access to data and technology throughout more and more experiences. A little bit at Lindenwood, was fortunate to work alongside of all the S&C experience that we were getting, work with Dr. Chad Kirksick, who's an incredible leader and expert within bioenergetics. And so was able to kind of just really get thrown into the deep end during the second year of our GA and do an applied, master's and thesis working with my athletes. And so the whole kind of research and being able to measure our process and our impact and truly define what outcome we were producing, through our coaching programming was really important to me. I think something that you see a lot in our industry, and certainly all industries, is like soft skills matter a ton, and emotional intelligence is incredibly important. But for me, those like serve as prereqs to be great at probably any profession. I mean, it's just being human. And so I guess I saw like a little bit of this shift on like people like doubling down on culture and soft skills and things like that. And I suppose for me, like those were already maybe some of my strengths and why I was able to have some early success in my career. But for me, it was really about honing in on like the hard skills. For me, it wasn't necessarily challenging to get players or coaches to buy in for whatever reason, just my personality or my work ethic, or make them just knowing that I care about improving and I have their best interest at heart for whatever reason. So once you have that, and you're going to have access to coaches and athletes and teams year after year after year, you have to be able to really refine and audit your process to make sure that you're continuing to improve. And so for me, like the PhD process was kind of the ultimate way of kind of doing that. And at that point, working in soccer, I'd always been interested in reading research and applying that as best as I could in my own practice. When I was out at Santa Clara University, started to use force plates and Kistler, had my first access to GPS in, first GP Sport, then Catapult and heart rate data. And so it was starting to like become very interesting to me, but didn't really know exactly how to make it, how to integrate it. It was more just kind of like monitoring and such. So yeah, at that point, I'd really just started to kind of look for like PhD studentships, which is basically like a GA in the States on steroids. And a lot of them are abroad in either soccer or football in England, which are really, really difficult to get for North Americans because of just permissions to work, and also in Australia. And so, yeah, I guess professionally, there was probably two reasons. One, I wanted to challenge myself in better understanding how to use data and the scientific process and applying that to my own coaching and programming to make sure that I'm serving my coaches and athletes the best that I can. The second, I guess, overarching professional reason would have been just seeing where the profession is going, both from a leadership standpoint in the high performance model or associate AD type roles. Certainly credibility and credentials can go a long way. And I think the vast majority of these leadership type positions, no matter how the model truly looks, often, in my opinion, have been going to the longest serving athletic trainer because they're usually, they're medically licensed or certified. PTs aren't as often in sport full time. They're usually contracted out. So oftentimes it was going towards ATs. And while that's not a bad thing, I just don't think that anyone, whether it's an AT or an S&C, anyone at the leadership position shouldn't be there just because they're the longest serving or because they're necessarily even just a great leader. That's certainly very important. But how can they drive collaboration and integration across the different disciplines? And if we were just to kind of shorten up what those disciplines are, S&C, sports med, if you're fortunate enough to have nutrition and psych resources, and then data science would kind of be the fifth one, as far as the different domains within sports science, if you will. So just saw leadership positions kind of in the industry shifting that way. I didn't want to be limited in what jobs I could get access to. So the PhD was mostly about making myself better so that I can improve my coaches and players, but also just making sure that from a professional standpoint, I was eligible for any type of role that I wanted to do. And it was actually, I think I remember telling you this maybe way back, when I was leaving Santa Clara. I'd already accepted the position at Manhattan College. I remember going out to lunch with two colleagues, I guess. But that day I saw a job posting, and it was the first ever job posting that I saw that had PhD preferred in the job description. And at that point, I'd already been maybe itching for it for 6 or 12 months. Long story short, just this is where maybe it ties into the personal reason. The itch got stronger and stronger and grew for, I would say, a good 2 years. It probably grew for about 12 to 18 months before I started actively searching for a role and deciding if I find the right role, I'm going to take it, to a good 6 months. 4 or 5, 6 months of actively applying, not having eligibility rights in UK, or not too many of them. Funding, was a big thing, having to move abroad to Australia. Long story short, awesome opportunity in Ireland kind of popped up, and went for it, got it, and was part of an incredible multidisciplinary team for a little over 4 years. And we can kind of jump into all that, but it's just wouldn't go away.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. And we've checked in every once in a while along the way. And you've always been a growth mindset. I don't know if that's the lingo that you use or that you adopt, but you've always kind of been, eyes on the horizon, what's next kind of guy. So I think the only thing I have to jump in and say, I understand it to be, you talk about somebody who's just there long enough and they are promoted and elevated. And I understand it. I'm sure it has a different name, but I've heard it called multiple times. It's called the Peter principle. It's where they might take a stock boy who's good at stocking shelves, and they make him the loading dock manager. And then he's loading dock manager for a while, and then he becomes the store manager, and then he becomes the regional manager. Well, maybe he was just really good at stocking shelves, and you promoted him away from his strengths, and now he's he's trying, but he's maybe not strong there anymore. So I think your vision for the future is to maybe not just to stick around and get promoted, but to actually prep for that leadership position. So and you talk about the culture and the soft skills being a prerequisite. And I think for a lot of people that's true. I would say that I'm guilty of having felt the need to go down that track a little bit more. Not that there's any, I'm not dogging myself, but I can definitely see that some of us go that route.
And if I could comment, no, like I think you're spot on, and they kind of, almost your two comments tie in, or I guess what I want to say is you need both. You absolutely need both. And some people are more naturally, maybe it's extroverted and they just kind of get that personality, the soft skill side of things. And then maybe some people are just more intellectually bright and they pick up the scientific application side and really understand physiology and biomechanics and how it applies and whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You need both for sure. And so there's no right or wrong as far as what you're naturally comfortable in, just making sure that you sharpen both. And I guess just to your comment about like the Peter principle, I think for me, and maybe it even ties in with like the idea of being really eager and trying to get as much experience during undergrad as possible, is resumes and contacts can get you a job, but they're not gonna keep your job. Like when you get there, you still have to make an impact. And especially the more elite level you go to, like it couldn't be more true. So as good as your CV looks, as good as people are willing to put their neck out for you, you have to be able to execute in the day-to-day skills. And so, yeah, just that promotion or just that good reference or, reputation isn't quite going to be enough. Like you might have been really strong in some environments, but it's not necessarily going to tie into that high performance director model in this scenario, like we were kind of referring to.
Yeah. Another saying on topic would be, I forget maybe if it's been coined, but you rise to the level of incompetence. Like you'll keep being elevated until you are failing, and then you find your failure spot. So you're over in Ireland. If you want to talk a little bit more about the university, and when you say football, it's always in reference to what us Americans call soccer, correct?
Yeah, so I worked in rugby,
Okay.
but yeah, I guess soccer.
Okay.
I
Okay.
typically call soccer, especially in like American S&C. If I'm abroad, I have to like be conscious about how I'm using the word. But yeah.
Just double checking. You're over in Ireland. You want to talk about the university, the team, and then maybe get into some of the research and some of the sports that you were focusing on?
Sure. Yeah, I guess just from a coaching standpoint, because this is a little more of a quick rundown, and feel free to have me go deeper if you want to. But so Ireland's quite a small country. There is not the type of resources or infrastructure that we have here in the States. What they do have, which is incredible, they are the most passionate people about sport I've ever met. It's only the second country I've lived in, but still, they are incredibly passionate. And I'm talking amateur sport. Like as much as I guess if we're calling, Power 5 college athletics here amateur, like it's that type of passion. But maybe even just for the neighborhood team, like they're showing up. And I say that just to say that University of Limerick, which is where I was employed at, is kind of one of two national training centers for Olympic athletes. And so you would have people that maybe live either in the South, it's not very far, but like the lower part of Munster, or on the West Coast, near 2 hours drive across from Dublin, where they might be Olympic level athletes, or trying to bridge into national team pools and train out of University of Limerick. So University of Limerick would be one of the better institutions in all of Ireland as far as facilities goes. They have beautiful grass pitches, different 4G turf pitches, a few different weight rooms, as well as it's the site where the Munster professional rugby team trains. Not affiliated with my work, and I'll get into my work in a second. But anyway, I say all that to say throughout my time was involved in just independent contract S&C work with Triathlon Ireland, Swimming Ireland, various independent athletes who were looking for kind of personal training or S&C to level up their game. And so, yeah, was doing a lot of coaching on the side, but my full-time role was part of the Irish Rugby Injury Surveillance Project or research unit, if you will. So back in 2016-17, the IRFU, which is the Irish Rugby Football Union, the national governing body for all of rugby in Ireland, the National Federation, if you will, was looking for a research partner to oversee all of the injury epidemiology and future research within the health and safety and performance of rugby union in Ireland. And University of Limerick landed that partnership. And so when I was applying for my role, they had already had 2 seasons of injury data collected across a good number of teams, over between 20 and 25 teams across both the first and second season. And so when my role was really kind of, I guess, created, or they were looking to fill it, was looking for someone to both continue on the injury epidemiology side, but also come in, identify some trends in the early data to start to really kind of carve out and implement a program at reducing the risks or, susceptible type of body parts or injury diagnoses that we were finding. And so that's kind of where my S&C background really kind of helped and helped me land the job. So that was, so I guess I'll really talk about kind of my role and what that project kind of looked like. But so the All Ireland League, you have kind of the national team, the IRFU team. There's 4 provinces or 4 professional teams across the country. There's really not much professional sport outside of the Olympic athletes. There's like a pro soccer league or a pro rugby league, but even elite sport in Ireland is quite amateur. But then right under the 4 pro teams, you have what's, the highest competitive amateur league in Ireland. And there's about 50 men's clubs competing and about 9 or 10 women's clubs competing across the country. We had about 25 to 30 participants each year participating in our project. And what that looks like on the injury epidemiology side is we coordinate with their physios who basically just give us their injury records across their team, across the season. And we kind of monitor that long term, season over season. We put out an end of year injury surveillance report to the IRFU so that they can obviously evaluate what their resource allocation looks like. Are trends getting better? Are they getting worse? Differences across male and female, differences between adult and school-aged rugby, et cetera. And so I would have led the injury epidemiology across our men's and women's clubs for 3 seasons. And that was really kind of the first aim of my thesis. I also did my PhD while I was over there. And then the second aim was to really kind of design, develop, and implement a bespoke program that really targeted and was specific for the Irish adult amateur community. And so I suppose there's 3 pillars of evidence that supported the final program. And we can, I'll maybe try and cut it off here so you can get some questions in, but those 3 pillars would have been quantitative data, and that would have been the injury trends that we identified in the early 2 seasons, as well as my first year. So we really had 3 seasons of data to kind of help identify what areas needed to be targeted. The second pillar of evidence would have been kind of best practices, and that would have been twofold. That would have been both best practice found in the literature, what studies or programs have previously been used and shown to be either efficacious or effective in reducing specific injuries. And the other part of best practice would have been through consultation with other experts in research, in sports medicine, in athletic performance, and in coaching, in this case, rugby coaching specifically. And so best practice would have been pillar 2. And then the third pillar would have been qualitative data and direct insights and feedback from the community itself, the community being the amateur head coaches, the amateur physios, the amateur players, the amateur S&Cs, who were really all operating within the league that we were, trying to aid and implement this program with. Maybe this kind of even jumps back to why I wanted to get a PhD or how I was evaluating that process. I could have a whole conversation in itself, and anyone considering doing a PhD needs to reflect and think about the entire journey. It's a lot. You need to be relentless and persevere through a lot of ups, downs, successes, failures, etc. But I say that to say that the PhD journey within the exercise science umbrella in the States can be quite different It can be quite different university to university, but what I tended to find in doing my research and almost doing a program here before going abroad was the first half, if not first 3 quarters, can be additional curriculum. So a lot more lectures, a lot more course content, all very similar and probably reiterating what you and I would have already done in our bachelor's and our master's across sport and phys and bioenergetics and human performance and all the different courses that kind of fall within that. So I had no interest in doing more coursework. I wanted to get out there in the field and figure out how to carry out applied pragmatic research with coaches and athletes directly, because that is exactly what I wanted the experience of a PhD to eventually allow me to better serve whatever team, club, college, organization that I work for in the future. And so I say all that to say my PhD journey was all by research. There's some kind of electives and maybe research methods type courses that you can take, but they would not be specific to exercise science. So all of my work packages, my thesis had 2 aims. The first was to really investigate and define the injury epidemiology, as well as welfare practices within the Irish adult amateur community for rugby union. And the second aim was to, like I said before, design, develop, and implement a program aimed at reducing injury risk whilst improving in performance. And so there were, I suppose, in the end, 6 work packages that really fulfilled those 2 aims. One very large work package, which is essentially 3 seasons of injury data that really define what the injury risk profile was across men's and women's teams. And then collating that along with 4 additional work packages, which would be a systematic review in ankle sprain risk factors. In my case, ankle sprains were the number 2 most common injury in both men and women. Concussions actually would have been number 1. For maybe obvious reasons, did not go down the concussion route. Spent about 3 months diving into the literature, and my supervisors and I, none of us are experts in concussion. There's a lot of physiology there. So I felt like ankle sprains was kind of a low-hanging fruit on where we can make an immediate impact. Did a systematic review in there to try and identify prospective risk factors that would help maybe inform future intervention or exercises to implement in the program. Along with that, and I guess maybe just to target, because I'll eventually get into the program. So concussion, ankle sprains, 1 and 2 in both men and women. It starts to differentiate between sex after. So hamstring strain risk would be a lot higher in men than in women. So number 3 across each season would have been hamstring strains for men. And then it just alternated a little bit on the women's side for the 3rd or 4th, but really you're looking at a lot more shoulder injury risk and knee sprain risk, which is no surprise considering women's athletes. And then, the other work packages would have been to dive into the literature, find other programs, almost do another lit review on other programs such as Box Smart, Rugby Smart, FIFA 11, RAMP, different kind of protocols, frameworks that almost look like either, warm-up periods or physical preparation periods ahead of sport. And, seeing what advantages or disadvantages or pros and cons there were that those programs have found in controlled studies, and kind of figuring out what works within what we're trying to do. And then doing focus groups, 6 different focus groups across 20 different coaches, players, physios, and S&Cs. That's a fairly large work package in itself. Certainly the back and forth iterations of working with the governing body, who are experts on the coaching side, right? They know what kind of contact technique is appropriate, working with athletic performance as far as what speed elements should be in there, and so forth. So each work package would have been kind of a different pillar leading into the ultimate program, which was collated through the different pillars of evidence. And then all of those, while they kind of led to what I was interested in, which was leading this program design and implementation, they also fulfilled I suppose understanding and pushing the scientific body of knowledge within the space of reducing injury in team sport. And so I would have, formulated an 8-chapter thesis and defended my dissertation and thankfully passed. And yeah, so that whole process is slightly different, but really used all my applied research to also simultaneously fulfill the PhD.
If you were to be talking to maybe a lecture hall full of players and coaches, what advice would you tell them for some injury prevention and things to watch out for?
Yeah, I think this might even transfer, and it does. I know it's going to translate into my own practice. I think it already was, which is kind of what made me create this kind of flexible framework that the program really has. The program in itself is 3 phases. The first phase is very much a dynamic warm-up type period, different locomotion, different planes of movement, increase heart rate, core temperature, etc. The second phase is really your targeted strength exercises. And so for us, that would have been 4 main areas. That would have been the head and neck, the shoulder girdle, the posterior thigh, and then for multiple reasons, but would have packaged together the kind of hip, knee, and ankle, both from a kinetic chain and biomechanical understanding. They obviously all work together. So utilizing different both vertical and horizontal and multiplanar jumps and plyos to really kind of target that. But it also makes sense from a saving time standpoint rather than picking one exercise for the hip, the knee, and the ankle, with time being the biggest constraint in these types of programs. The third phase of the program, and I'll kind of get to your question, I just think it's important to kind of lay this out because it's going to translate to outside of just rugby. I think any head coach or sport that maybe doesn't have an expert S&C can really kind of take this framework and implement it. The third one is really kind of more your sport specific or performance demands. And so rugby is a very contact heavy and speed heavy type program. Now, soccer would also be a very speed heavy. Lacrosse would also be both contact and speed heavy. So it's kind of that final 3 to 4 minutes is spent more towards like, okay, primers, if you want to call them that, but what are more the performance or specific sport demands? And so after the 4 targeted strength areas, 3 to 4 minutes around tackle technique, first ground, body to ground type contact preparation, maybe some shoulder stability in that, some tackle technique, and then incorporating the ball and some more kind of grappling type exercises and things of that nature. So I say that because really that third element, I think, is what I found, at least in our cohort, in our amateur environment, who only got to really train twice a week regularly. And then the third session of the week was really the match. Oftentimes, if the second session, let's say match was on a Saturday, second session of the week would be on a Thursday night. Maybe their Tuesday night training session would have been a little bit more heavy. They're recovered from the weekend prior. They still have a few days out until the next match. So Thursday was a little bit lighter. Maybe it wasn't even full contacts, etc. Maybe it was only planned for a 50, 60, maybe a 70-minute session. Certainly not usually 90. It didn't seem anyway with our data. They were also eliminating the contact prep and the speed prep. And so from a frequency standpoint, they may or may not have gotten the appropriate dose of contact and speed in that one Tuesday session. And then they were expecting that basically longitudinal exposure over the course of a 7, 8, 9-month season to be enough to prepare them and sustain robustness throughout that season. I felt like the most immediate, lowest hanging fruit was encouraging and coaching them to, regardless of what your training session looked like, spend the full 15, 20 minutes around the physical preparation side, still implementing these to get more and more and more exposure, even if the immediate training session doesn't demand it. And I think that can be said for a lot of different, both competitive levels and sports, where we almost try to get too individualized or sport specific, because maybe we're scared that a head coach won't think that we've considered this, or we've thought of this, or, well, why are we doing the same thing that we did yesterday? Our training session's completely different. And yeah, okay, maybe it is, but my justification is long-term exposure to this physical preparation, being contact or speed type exposure, is going to make us more resilient for these types of demands over the long period of a longer season. And so I think that's really important. I think we see the same thing in soccer, where a lot of it's like recover, recover, recover. So yeah, I think that's something that is big. If you have a shorter session, don't just maybe take that shorter session. Yes, it might be more time on their feet, but you almost now have more time that could be put towards that physical preparation side, because you're getting that time back on a shorter training session. That would be one kind of takeaway. I think maybe not necessarily rugby, but I think for any sport, I just think that physical preparation period, or the warm up, can be so much better utilized. And I think that we overemphasize the need to be in the weight room to really accomplish what we need to do. And so if staying healthy, if being resilient, if having a strong posterior chain in soccer is critical, right? It's the number one most common injury, hamstring strains in soccer. There's so many ways to do that creatively on the pitch without ever stepping into the gym. You might need some equipment, but whether it's the Nordic curl, a partner hip extension, different kind of glute and hip bridge exercises, just getting a valve slide out there, or a stability ball, or a band. There's so many ways to kind of get so much more value out of that 15 or 20-minute physical preparation period that I just think is underutilized, especially in season when time constraints are big. And if you're in the collegiate setting, they're running off to school. If they're in the pro setting, they probably just want to get out of there, versus transitioning and having to put flats on and go into the gym and weight room and so forth. So that, yeah, just take better advantage of that time period.
What you don't happen to have any kind of guess or statistic on your injury rates in practice versus in competition?
Yeah, competition. So like for us, for amateur rugby union,
yep.
So much higher in match, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much higher in match, which is to be expected, right? Like,
yeah, I would hope so.
Even full contact in training, you're still not trying to take that guy's head off quite as much as probably someone wearing a different color.
Yeah.
So whether there's so many psychosocial factors, but also just drill selection, that there's so many reasons why that training injury rate's so much lower.
Yeah. Okay, so we are emphasizing that the warm-up be designed a little bit more appropriate, like it's a more of an intervention-based warm-up. And you mentioned, fighting that urge to just mimic the sport, to just appease maybe the head coach, or not being sure what to do. I will say, yes, it's very tempting, especially when you're starting out. Maybe I didn't succumb to this temptation as much as others, but it's very tempting to mimic the sport in the weight room. It seems like a sure thing. You can always defend that and have logic for that. But again, sometimes that feeds right into that overtraining. And if they're playing that sport 20 hours a week, an extra 20 minutes of mimicking that sport in the weight room probably could be skipped.
For sure. And I would say, like, you didn't really just touch on this, but it made me think of this, which is, like, how do we know what can be skipped, or how do we know how much time is too much or too little? Like, we all probably, it depends, right? Like, if I'm in a collegiate environment, I have a lot more freedom to kind of do what I want. If I'm in a pro setting, you're a lot more, you're at liberty to what the head coach wants, for sure. And even like your top highest paid players. But like, ask them, do some qualitative research, whether it's formal for a paper or just a survey or like a structured sit down conversation, and don't just maybe take it for one or two people. Like, have you ever had a conversation with the coach and said, "Hey coach, if you just give me an extra 4 minutes, I think we are going to be significantly stronger by week 12 of this season. So instead of our 8 minutes, can I have 12 minutes? And here's what I'm going to do with it. Here's maybe one outcome that I'll show us at week 12 to see if that's held true. Like, hopefully they keep you accountable. Oftentimes it's a little more anecdotal and subjective, but like, go fight for that time. I think, especially in the professional setting. And I think just by sparking the conversation, whether it's bringing a player in or 2 or 3 players, having a small focus group, rather than just doing the warm up at 17 minutes, if they expected or want it to be at 7 or 8, like, they're always going to pull back. So just by you pulling them in is showing them that you're interested, and you get 2 minutes to just say why it's important. Like, you might get your 15 minutes right there without any bite back, or with more motivation or more intent behind what they're doing. So I think don't underestimate structured conversations, whether it be for actual focus groups, actual interviews. I think they go a lot further than surveys. Surveys can be good to kind of justify a means at the end of a season or something like that, because we're not good at defining our success any other way. But I think structured conversations are so much better, or semi-structured, you should call them.
You can take it any way you want to, but you mentioned focusing your research on ankle injuries. Do you have some advice for us regarding ankle specific injury prevention?
Nope. So here's the funny thing. So during that systematic review, there were two reasons why I didn't go down an ankle injury or ankle sprain specifically intervention only. The 2 reasons: one, in the literature, there was actually, so we weren't able to do a meta-analysis on the systematic review because a lot of the methods and injury definitions varied across a lot of the studies that were included, which is kind of common, annoying, but common. Thankfully, with different consensus statements, both within injury surveillance as well as sport-specific consensus statements in the last few years, it's going to continue to get better. And what that would allow us to do is to, if multiple studies are doing things the exact same way and finding the same value and benefit from a similar or same exercise, then obviously we become more confident that that's going to translate out into the real world. So unfortunately, we found that there wasn't that kind of confidence. Force plates definitely seem to indicate where maybe some risk profile can be identified. But hip strength, BMI, ankle range of motion, different papers have shown about 17 different risk factors. Across all the studies that I included, there are about 17 different risk factors identified. So there's still more work there to be done, particularly on the prospective, or I should say, initial onset of an ankle sprain rather than a rehab. There's a decent bit of literature out there on effective ways to rehab and reduce recurrence once they pick up maybe their first or second injury. But in a healthy ankle, it's still quite limited. The other reason why we went down not an ankle only and into a full body holistic intervention was, I suppose, 2 more reasons. One, it's just a little bit better of an approach when dealing with population-based data. And so our data was, across not individual risk factors, but across the injury incidence within the entire league, or in this case, within our participating clubs. And so what those trends were. So how can we intervene or target the lowest hanging fruit and reduce the most common injuries made the most sense. And we felt like obviously we could do that. It's been done before. We can target more than just one injury. In this case, it's been done in the FIFA 11 and in other programs as well, and in particular rugby. And then I guess the second reason, or third reason, if you will, it's what the IRFU wanted, right? So at the end of the day, I didn't just carry out what I wanted to. My goal was to make myself better around implementing the scientific process and creating a program, applying the program, understanding its outcomes, how would I change things in the future, but also serving the governing body, right? So just like you would a head coach or an athletic administration and so forth, everyone has an ultimate goal. We all answer to someone. And so the IRFU certainly saw it more valuable to approach it by targeting multiple injuries and really creating a full body physical preparation program rather than just a warm up period, if you will.
All right, Coach. So you spend a few years looking into the research on rugby, and you're over in Ireland, and kind of what happens with all of that data, and kind of how do you conclude your PhD?
Yeah, so it's a big team I'm part of. So thankfully, a lot of the work I have done was continued on from previous researchers, and thankfully, there's researchers to continue the work that I've kind of laid and continue to build on that. So my final program or the Engage program has been adopted by the IRFU as kind of best practice for that physical preparation period. We were able to implement that in a controlled feasibility trial across 21 men's and women's clubs. The data for those results have been published in ACSM at last year's World Congress. I probably won't speak to if you do enough Googling or searching, you could find me kind of spitting out some of the data points there. But hopefully in the coming months, the full peer-reviewed journal write-up will be out. So I'll probably just save it for that. But yeah, it's exciting to kind of see where the IRIS project is going. I look forward also to how some of these more longitudinal research units in sport have really found a great footing abroad, and how hopefully some of those types of research units can start to be employed here in U.S. sport, whether it be at the collegiate or professional level. I don't know that we'll ever get those types of units into our amateur sport like they do abroad, because the passion isn't for competitive and camaraderie. The passion here in amateur sport is for business, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then kind of referring back to that whirlwind of a career you've had, in case you guys missed it, Coach Dolan actually has a pretty good background and a current role in the soccer world, and including that soccer world, he spent some time. So I want to hear about soccer in particular. You know, I'm working with soccer players right now, Lindenwood women's soccer, and with his soccer specialty, he's also spent time with the youth athletes. So I've got two very young athletes at home that I'm in particular concerned about. So Coach, I don't know if you want to mix and mash or cover it, but can you take us into the soccer and maybe some youth advice as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll probably do soccer first, and I have a current kind of engagement or interest and itch in the youth side with the niece and nephews who, since moving back to Philly a few months ago, have been kind of ramping up their training, and it's been a blast. But yeah, I suppose on the soccer side, so yeah, after a good stint in collegiate athletics, would have worked for New York Red Bull, and so was head of academy performance. So from like U12 to U19. Since then, I think U19 is kind of that age group's gone away. But yeah, so U12 to U19, and what that looks like in a professional soccer academy here in the States, particularly those academies that aren't residential, and vast majority are not residential. You could be running warm-ups to maybe some of your older teams have GPS units. And so that would imply we're kind of, coordinating or periodizing out some training loads for some of the older teams where there's a little bit more of an undulation as far as like high minutes and low minute guys. Maybe their training frequency is a little bit higher than the U12s to U14s who might only be getting two or three training sessions in a week, where the olders might be, 3 or 4 more regularly. And then assisting on the MLS side, so playing more of an assistant role and doing a lot more of the weight room stuff, the occasional warm up, occasional match day, and with a particular emphasis on letting the head of fitness kind of lead the team initiative and the team program, but guys who are kind of either in very long rehab processes and in nowhere near getting back to the field, perhaps doing some kind of upper body or cross training type things, leading some of that, or getting involved on kind of the late stage return to play as well. So was fortunate to work with some incredible staff there, both on the performance medical side, as well as the head coaches. Some of the staff that I worked at within Red Bull was, I would say, very eye-opening from like what a high performance environment should look like, not the model perspective that we talk about in our industry, like the high performance model necessarily. Great collaboration, great integration, great communication, great culture, but just it was more about the environment. Top to bottom was fantastic. And I guess I say all that to say that I was able to get involved in the high performance department with US Soccer. And so again, similarly, not necessarily built out with all the resources of nutrition, psych, technology, regular training, periodization, impact. It's quite a different environment at the national team level because you're more, I consider it more of a managing type role, meaning you're only with them for anywhere from 5 to 12, 14 days, sometimes a longer camp, for example, was leading the, high performance strategies for the Pan American Games out in Chile this year. But what that looks like is not necessarily managing a bunch of staff. It's more just making sure that warm-ups are accounted for, technology, wellness, communication with the head coach, collaboration and communication with athletic training on any injuries that or niggles that might turn into injuries. And we need to kind of monitor training load and make sure they get back to their club healthy to not really impact their career. So it's a little bit more about managing rather than impacting and influencing. A lot of the players are considered elite, even if their training age can be quite young. You just don't quite get the time and access to do proper S&C sessions. Certainly on longer camps, we got maybe 4 or 5 lifts in across a 17 or 18 day camp or tournament. But really those are like 2-3 sets, low volume, low intensity, full body strength. So yeah, but overall, I mean, an incredible environment to be a part of. You have to work with people that you don't work with regularly. So you have experts across both the technical and coaching side of things, the sporting side, to working with an athletic trainer or a physical therapist who you maybe have worked with before, maybe not, to different personalities of all the players. And so a really, really interesting role where you get to kind of have your hands in, I guess, a few different buckets and learn from a lot of different buckets. But in the end, it's really just about making sure that the players are readily available to show up and compete or train at a high level, depending on if they're looking to get selected for a future camp or a future tournament, or if we're in the middle of a tournament, just making sure that everything we can do from a recovery, nutrition, sleep standpoint are all the, I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Yeah, they say that the greatest ability an athlete can have is availability, and so just keeping them healthy and letting them do their thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably where my philosophy has changed the most. If I'm like putting it down on a resume or a job application, like there's 2 lines that I like live by, but like from I suppose like a perspective approach, like how fun was it to just care about like pre-post testing when you're like a young S&C coach? Like did their vert go up? Did there's like how many guys are squatting over 500? I think it was either 6 or 8. Shout out Lindenwood Men's Lax. Like,
yeah,
some like that's the fun, sexy stuff, right? And then I think part of it comes with the elite level. One, and depending on where, like maybe if I had a few more years of experience in the NFL, maybe those numbers would matter a little bit more. My guess tells me more recently, probably not. Maybe certainly 10, 15 years ago, your experience in the league, maybe those numbers were a little bit more cared for by the head coach, by the players. But like nowadays, guys want to feel good. They want to be healthy. That's it. That's all that matters. And so I think for me, like, I think we do have two overarching priorities as a strength and conditioning coach, which is the title I prefer, performance coach, if you will, whatever. But it's one, to reduce the risk of injury and make sure that they're available to do what they need to do. And then two, if you can improve their performance, great. I think it's a lot more gray area as far as how we define that. I think it then branches off into, are you increasing their physical performance or are you improving their sport performance? Because don't even get me on that conversation, right? Like that can be defined a million different ways by every player, by every coach. It shouldn't be. It should be objective, but it's not. Or you could talk about physical performance, and that's where, you could talk about speed, power, strength, RSI, stuff like that. But for me, it's like, I think it's just so much more impactful to have really, really good injury reporting, injury surveillance, understand what your team data looks like, understand what your individual injury history looks like for all of your players, or at least your key players, and making sure that you are approaching your programming accordingly. I just think our value needs to shift more towards that, more so than the sexiness of pre and post, adaptations.
Absolutely.
I feel like I just went on. I probably went on a tangent there. We were about to talk about youth sports, maybe.
Yeah, let's do it.
The numbers can be fun, but so like 9 months ago, I started training my niece and nephews. I was home in Philly for a few weeks over the summer, so laid a decent foundation with the niece and nephews before having like the craziest fall of my life and career. But then over Christmas, I was back and they were out of school. And so we got I think maybe 10 sessions in like 3 weeks, like about 3 weeks, 3 sessions a week for, a little over a month. And then now we're at like 2 sessions a week, usually at least. If not, we're sneaking in a third if they only have like one thing on the weekend. But thankfully, both of the parents are former Division I college athletes. So like they get it. But I don't know. It's so fun not caring about what the head coach wants. It's so fun not caring about, they don't even know what they want.
Yeah.
They're just stoking it in like a sponge. So at the end of the day, making it fun and engaging for them is the most important thing. That's number one. A close second is technique and safety. And that's from how they're moving and biomechanics to also reiterating the heck out of just how to operate in a weight room and how to grab the bar, how to unrack, how to rack, why we don't grab it this way, not just grab it this way. No, why don't you do it the other way? So I'm just absolutely hammering them. Hopefully it's going to be important one day to them. I think it will be, but it's just so much fun. We've gone from prisoner squatting to they're starting barbell split jerks. I got this 15-pound barbell split jerk. Whatever. I could go on a rant on different stuff we're doing, but it's long-term athletic development. I think the principles for me are just try and teach them as wide of arsenal as possible in all different types of movement patterns. Number one. Number two, make sure they're learning the rules and safety guidelines for how to operate correctly. And build their confidence, get them to enjoy it, because yes, it's going to help them improve their sport, whatever that might be. And that's a good way to get them bought in, but it's not the only thing I'm pushing. For me, it's about hey, there's so much health implication here. And whatever you want to do when you're older, this is going to help. It's going to help you face adversity. It's going to help you get uncomfortable. It's going to help. It's always going to be your ally when things are going wrong. You come in, you throw a little iron around, like you're gonna feel better. And like the older one, she's the older niece, she's 12. And there's been some days, and it's not from her directly, but I'll hear it from the mom. Like, she didn't really want to lift today. She had a rough day, and she literally walked in, Patrick, and like she felt so much better after. Like, that's awesome. Like the fact that they're recognizing the importance of exercise and physical activity is like so rewarding.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a blast. I'm excited to see where this goes. They're at 9 months right now. I told them at 1 year. Like, I did do some pre-testing, like we did counter movement jump, squat pause jump. I think we did broad jump. I'll have to look back, but like the first day that I ever worked with them, I was like, we're going to test some things, but we're not looking at this for a year. So in June, I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, sweet. That's good. Talk about all the important things that you do with those, the safety and the teaching and the basics. And, two thoughts come to mind is that they say that a thing becomes really, really complex before it becomes simple again. So, like, could you have taught them these things 10 years ago? And
me 10 years ago, or them as a 2-year-old? Me 10
like,
years ago.
You 10 years ago, could you have taught them these things 10 years ago instead of spending the next 10 years learning and practicing and educating yourself? Yeah, you could have, but you wouldn't have 10 years of international high-level rationale for why you're doing the basics and why the basics are so important.
I totally agree. And yeah, like that cycle happens, right?
Yeah,
like
it just
like the learning curve and all that. But I think, yeah, without the experience, like it could not be more of a simple program that we're doing. We're not even doing a program. We're exercising right now. Like every week, every session is so different.
Yeah.
Like based on like their mood, based on how much time we have. I'm teaching like big fundamental right now is like, cool, you're leading warm up now. Like the first 6 months, 8 months, like the last couple weeks, it's like, cool, what do you remember for warm up? Like, why do we do this? What's this working on? So like everything is just evolving and progressing and going backwards and up and down and left and right. Like there's no set thing. And people can frown upon that. Like they're 9 and 11, almost 12. Like I write stuff down, don't get me wrong, but like not, it's very flexible. I don't know. I don't know what I was going to say, but
I mean, if you think about like auto-regulating things, like you might take a high-level athlete and like check their HRV. For a child, you might say, how do you feel today? What sounds fun to do? And that's auto-regulation. And you talk about the priority of like a good time. Well, that's probably great for bonding with their uncle. But also like my wife is a kindergarten teacher and my daughter's in kindergarten right now. When they go to school/work, the most important thing at that level, yes, you want to be learning like fundamentals, ABCs, numbers. I think the goal is like to count to 100. But it's to fall in love with learning and being at school. So like my wife's job is to teach these kids these really important basic fundamental information, but it's also to make it enjoyable. And then, what do I worry about when my daughter's at kindergarten? Not in my wife's class, but in a different class. My concern is not that she comes home and knows some extra numbers or, I mean, yes, I worry about that. My concern is that she had a good day and that she likes her teacher. Luckily, she loves her teacher. But yeah, that's my biggest concern because, I did my fair share of education. And if you don't have that motivation and that deep underlying reason to go hit the books, just enjoying it is enough to get you through several years. And I think that the same thing goes for these kids is like maybe one day they'll fall in love with like being on the road team, the crew, I guess maybe as that was called.
crew team,
so maybe they'll fall in love with that. But for now, let's just build a positive association with like moving your body and like testing every once in a while to see where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one quick comment to actually, you said like APRE. So in and I think it builds back to this confidence, which is like what these kids are learning. And I think autonomy is a huge, accelerator towards confidence. And just, yeah, so the Engage program that I designed, I tried to have like back to everyday stressors are different. Every day is different. Everyone has very different like occupations. Everyone's at very different training ages. So the flexible framework, there's different components of it that were flexible that we didn't really get into, but like the volume of the different exercises was a little bit auto-regulated or self-regulated. And like, as long as, you educate them on the progressive overload side of things, like, hey, if this is where you are, the goal is to either do that much or a little bit more each week. But if you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it. Or if you want to choose the easier exercise, you do that. And I see that flexible, a lot of flexibility in what I'm doing right now with my niece and nephews and other youth clients that I've worked with in the past too, is like just checking in on like learning and like, hey, have we gone over this yet? Or, hey, what question do you have? And like their answer or their question might target what we do a little bit that day because they're curious or they feel like they've failed at this and they want to work at it better. They're like feeling super confident in something and I know they're terrible at it. I'm not going to destroy them right on the spot. Like yeah, cool. Yeah, you're right. You're doing that. Let's move on. And then we're going to come right back to it like 3 days later or whatever it is. But yeah, flexibility is so big. Autonomy is huge. And it all leads to like confidence and having fun. Like what else are we doing if we're not doing those two things for our athletes, particularly the youth?
I am calling this podcast is the Winning Wellness Podcast, and that's kind of got a double meaning. Some people are not well enough to compete; they're not well enough to do anything beyond pursue wellness. They are trying to win back their wellness. So we have that population, and then some people are able to pursue their goals, whether it's looking good naked or running a new mile time or competing with a team. So they have goals that they're trying to achieve. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you think deserves some time and attention as far as how to win well?
Love the name, by the way.
Appreciate that.
Do love the name because wellness, but a lot of us are competitive and like winning. Like it can be about winning. That's okay. Yeah. So I suppose like for me, everyone has to come into their own life's philosophy, I guess, at some point. And for me, like it didn't really hit till like 30. It was very, professionally driven. A lot of my choices were, and I wouldn't say they were like vain or arrogant or like just trying to claw to the top. Like that certainly wasn't it. It was always about finding a new environment where I was going to be challenged and get better. At the same time, I was very ignorant to the personal side of things. And so like for me, I guess for like winning well, like you can only take care of others, which is what coaching is, right? Like we're here to serve. I have a Jesuit education and like man for and with others. Like I don't necessarily like preach that, but like it's just who I am. Like I love working with other people and I love doing that through coaching. And so you can only serve others well, at least sustainably, if you take care of yourself first. And so I think for me, that's like that start to really kind of hit home. And so for me, like I've kind of defined what my 3 buckets are in decision making and actions, which is physical, mental, and financial health. I think that gives me back my time as much as I want and how I can spend it. But yeah, I guess like exercise, like you have to exercise regularly, and that sounds funny because we're exercise scientists or strength coaches or whatever you want to call us. We work in physical education, but like how many times every coach in this industry goes through ruts where they're just not physically active, and whether they talk themselves out of, well, if it's not going to be a good enough session, I'm just going to skip it, or I'll leave it till after my athletes. I'll take care of my athletes first. And then your session's crap or you skip it entirely, whatever. So at some point, and I get it when you're young, like I'm on one hand, I'm glad I carried out the last 15 years the way I did. I think I over prioritized my coaches and athletes and maybe not enough of me. But I think I'm also happy and grateful for realizing that I'm at a point now where like I'm worried about me. Not concerned, but like I'm just taking actions to exercise first thing in the morning, like that. Physical health, my number one bucket. It's the first thing I take care of. Sleep, we're not gonna, harp on that too much, but like, yeah, you gotta sleep. And I think part of sleeping is how to just relieve as much stress as possible when going to bed, whether that's through reflection or I'm not very spiritual, like prayer, being grateful, talking to your partner. I don't know. Everyone's probably different, but I just know that when I like take a few moments to like calm down, be grateful, content, or even happy with how the day went, even if shit went wrong, I just get such a better night's sleep. And then the third one, I guess, winning well is like, yeah, like counseling and therapy. And like, that doesn't have to be a scary thing. You don't have to be going through shit. You don't have to be dealing with family drama or partner drama or medical related issues or work problems. Like get ahead of it, find a bounce board, because I just think talking is really healthy. If you have a friend or a colleague and it's like somewhat structured and consistent, that could be great too. I don't know that it needs to be a professional, but I think counseling or therapy, whatever you want to call it, just as a regular bounce board in good times, not just in bad, is so good for you. Because while you should have hopefully strong relationships with whether it's your loved ones, right, your partner or your parents or whatever, like we're not there to just be the ear all the time for people's shit. Like, but a professional is. Like if you find a good counselor therapist, then it's just all about you for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Like that's awesome. Usually just you get shit off your chest. You stay on top of it. You reflect. You realize that things maybe weren't so bad. So yeah, exercise first thing in the morning. Try and go to bed, relax, and talk it out.
Nice. Those seem to be 3 power hitting pillars there. Yeah, thank you for that.
Good question.
Appreciate that. Yeah, you got any questions for me?
Tons. You want to hit pause and we'll go for another 90? I should have thought of at least one funny one or one good. Yeah, I got one.
Lay it on me.
Of course. Your kid's goal is to be an Olympic athlete. Are you choosing their individual coach to be, you're not an option, I'm not an option, Coach Simon Overcamp, Dr. Simon Overcamp, or Coach Joey BERGLES? You're going to cut this out, I know
it. That is a great question.
And we didn't mention the other 15 Lindenwood people it could be.
Yeah. There's a lot of good coaches, and my kids' genetics are so strong, it probably doesn't matter. They probably can't be stopped.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm definitely watering it down. I think both Coach Simon and Coach Joey could get the job done for sure. I think the tie goes to Coach Simon because he's been on my podcast and Joey hasn't yet.
I like that.
So Joey's gonna get the challenge here soon, and so after that it will be harder. But I will say, Coach Simon's doing some interesting stuff over in Germany. He is at the Olympic level. That's what he's doing, and then If you guys don't know who Coach Joey, I will put in a link here. But he's making kids jump out of the gym right now. So I don't know exactly what his recipe is, but he is doing some amazing things with youth athletes. So super exciting to see. It's just a social media presence. I think everybody in the world is following him right now. He's got some huge numbers on Instagram.
If he gets any more, we might have to call him a guru.
Hey, from what I've seen, I'm ready to follow.
100%. No, he's first class.
Yeah.
They both are.
Yeah, but his intensity, maybe it'd be good for the kids to go be around that.
100%.
But yeah, I need at the end of the day, I need somebody who's gonna make them fall in love with the process. So right now, Matilda is very into dance. She likes ballet. She's kind of feeling gymnastics. She's got a good gymnastics background. My wife is 5'1". I'm 6 feet tall, so I think Matilda will end up being close to the right height for being a gymnast. Maybe a little tall for that. But she loves those things. And side note, we went to a Ninja Warrior gym the other day, where you climb around, do all that stuff. She was doing the monkey bars like I've never seen her swing on her own from one thing to the other. So that was cool to see. And then Mac wants to be Batman right now. So
Batman's jacked.
Batman is jacked. So they're both into eating protein and exercising. So Mac hasn't quite found what gets him fired up a little bit. So I took him to a jiu-jitsu class, and the gi kind of made him hot. So I don't think he was in the mood for that. We did wrestling. We did a couple months of wrestling this year. And he'd get excited to go, and he'd warm up with the team, and then he'd come over in the corner and wrestle me for the whole hour, which is fine with me because there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. But we just gotta we'll find his thing. We'll find his thing. So
absolutely.
Good question.
Well, I'm picking Coach Mitch next time for my own kids.
I appreciate that. Send them on over.
Pleasure chatting today, Coach. Really, really appreciate it. Awesome to catch up. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you. And if listeners are interested in maybe reaching out to you or making contact, what's the best avenue for them to go?
Yeah, I don't mind. They can always reach out to you, and feel free to share my cell phone. But if they were to follow me on Instagram, that's probably the quickest, or LinkedIn. They can always reach out. Coach P. Dolan on Instagram and Twitter, Coach P. Dolan. And then LinkedIn, you should be able to just find me, Patrick Dolan, SCCC probably. And then, my best email would be performancedirections@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for listening to our Winning Wellness podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for podcast guests or topics, you can submit those through YouTube comments. You can message me on Instagram. My handle is Mitch Schwartzman, or you can email me at coachmitchschwartzman@gmail.com.